If there's any subject that gets brought up the most when people want to talk about history, it's that of love. Many people have very specific views and ideas of how love looked like in the past. Mainly that it didn't exist. We're fed this constant story of unwilling child brides being forced into marriages with sleazy older men, women having no choice over what happened with their bodies, and people being trapped in loveless relationships with that added hardship of not even knowing what love is. What is love? Baby, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me no more. It is worth knowing that these ideas have not been invented out of whole cloth entirely. Within the Tudor dynasty itself, Margaret Beaufort, when married and had a child, was 12. And Henry VIII married Catherine Howard when he was 49, and she was around, judging by academic research, probably 17 or maybe younger. Yikes. However, taking extreme events like these and applying them to the wider sort of axis of society has warped our understanding of love, dating and relationships within the Tudor period. There were approximately, at most, 50 noble families and 350 knightly families in a society that had, by the end of the 16th century, a population of 4 million. That's a teeny tiny percentage of people for whom early or even child marriage could be considered a norm. After all, I wouldn't say use Prince Andrew's actions to formulate a theory on love, relationships, and whether people can sweat in contemporary England now. And you shouldn't do the same with the Tudor nobility. Love, dating, marriage, they were just as exciting, dramatic, heartrending, and important for people in the 16th century as they are now. Love, attraction, mutual affection were considered essential parts of a relationship, and ideas of romantic love were as deeply rooted in Tudor popular culture as they are now. Sure, they didn't have Disney and rom-coms, but they had ballads and folk tales and plays and grand epic stories that focused on the destructive and creative power of true love. However, love, affection and individual choice had to exist within a patriarchal, hierarchical society where status, rank and familial decisions influenced who you would date and marry. Love had to be balanced alongside the need to make a pragmatic, lifelong choice. Marriage dictated your social status, the house you could keep, the family you could have, and it was intended to last until someone died. So you can't just back out. It was the most important decision a person could make, and the impact of their dating choices could dictate the course of their entire life. That's a lot of pressure to bring on a first date, not gonna lie. That's a lot of pressure. Courtship in the Tudor period was a lot more serious than modern dating. Successful courtship that ended with marriage transformed young people into being full members of society. Marriage was the end of youth and the start of adulthood, with married households considered the foundation of Tudor society. If you want to get anywhere in life, you gotta get married. And with more than 90% of those reaching adulthood eventually getting married, remaining unmarried or not dating anyone was considered really weird and strange and would deny you from being considered a full part of your local community. Family was the cornerstone of promoting social harmony and a functioning commonwealth. So, us queers, not really not really well considered, so not really focusing on us today. While there has been quite a Vigorous debate over the nature of love and courtship in the early modern period over the 20th century, Lawrence Stone argued that the idea of individualism and the very concept of love grew over the period, while you have people like Alan McFarlane who argue for a very intense level of personal choice in marriage and courtship. The best way to get an insider's view on the Tudor dating scene is to look at the first-hand accounts we have. Letters, diaries, autobiographies, court records, and much more. And while most of these are from men and tend to bias towards a more elite worldview, we can gain a good idea of how the dating scene worked over the period. So, how did people start courting? How did people meet? Who asked who out? Did people go out for fun, or was marriage always the goal? What would you expect from your Tudor lover? Were women equal partners or passive in a developing relationship? And how did the Tudors go on dates? This is your one-stop shop to learning all the dating do's and don'ts of the 16th century. As said, courtship's not an exact parallel to our dating. Going out on a date or dating can be, it's nothing serious, a way of meeting new people, or it can be an effort to make a more serious attachment. Courtship, or wiving, is the definite declaration of moving towards marriage with someone. Now, that doesn't mean that there wasn't, fooling around and playing the scene. That's wooing. There's plenty of evidence to suggest that people walked out together, exchanged love tokens and kisses and the usual teenage stuff of getting drunk in the local park and playing games of... Now, I'm quoting here. This isn't my metaphor. This is Tudor metaphor. These games called Barley Beak and Codpiece Kissing. You can fill in the gaps of what those entailed. Sure, virginity's sort of important the time you get married. More on that in a future video, but there's plenty of steps that can be taken before you get to that point, if you catch my drift, and people were very aware of them. But courtship was focused on creating a pathway to marriage. And it's not a game. Toying with people's affections, sending mixed signals, messing people around, or being known as someone who's not on the up and up with your sexual moral behaviour could see you as being made into this figure of scandal, abuse, and potentially being ostracised from your community. So, no more codpiece kissing once you reach a certain age. Courtship was a specific sequence of inquiries, approaches, rituals, and undertakings. Whether or not you could call it dating is debatable, but from the common sorts to the elite classes, there's rules to follow. Courtship involved familiarisation, a clarification of intentions, and considering your prospects. A couple would exchange tokens, negotiate options that would see them enter into marriage, and then seal their consent to be married. And yes, there has to be mutual consent on marriage, a topic I'll be covering when I talk about marriage. There would be discussions of property. Who gets what? Who has a claim on what? How would things be balanced between the couple? And finances. A lot of finances. For wealthier couples, there's the issue of the bride's dowry, the potential portion of her father or mother's estate on their death, and there's the issue of jointure, and the amount of money a woman might reasonably expect if she were widowed. Highly likely, most people lose a spouse over the course of the 16th century. If the bride is a widow, there will be independent properties that she may or may not want her husband to have any say on, or to be inherited directly by the children of their marriage. At every step, courtship is a collaborative exercise by the couple and by anyone else who has a stake in where things are going. Parents, friends, kinfolk, neighbours, your local priest, your boss. They would all give their opinions, advice, and encouragements to particular matches, and they had to give consents for a couple to marry. That's right, you could spend a year hashing out a financial arrangement to marry the girl of your dreams, only for your boss to put an end to it by denying you consent to get married. Take the case of Thomas Wythorne. A friend offered help to find a wife, and I'm quoting here, "How say you if I would help you to a widow who is come of worshipful parentage and hath £20 a year dowry or jointure, who hath no children, and is of years nigh about 5 or 6 years younger than yourself?" When the pair was introduced by the mutual friend, the widow greeted Thomas with a friendly kiss. When he mentioned marriage, she offered friendly entertainment. So he responded with due salutations and ceremonies belonging to a wooer's function. Remember, wooing, different from wiving. But this was taken as a plan for marriage, with Thomas giving her a courtship token that signalled her acceptance for the match. And then it all went wrong. She returned the token, and the match was off. While Thomas thought that they had a certain arrangement to marry, the widow claimed her promise was none that she might break it again upon cause. So this case, which it went to court, that's why we have such a detailed record of it, reveals how people's perceptions of differences between wooing, wiving and courtship could create this grey area of uncertainty. It highlights the role of friends and family in bringing people together and the potential risks that came with the whole system, because Thomas and the widow had certainly something going on, but whatever it was, she decided it kind of meant that she didn't want to marry him anymore, so don't know what happened there. I wish I could know. So, you're a hot young thing, or a recent widow or a widower, and you're on the hunt for a serious marriage prospect. Where are you going to start? Marriage manuals and advice books urge young people to focus on the inner qualities of a potential partner, not their outer beauty. There should be good liking between you and your intended partner. There were plenty of words to describe the feeling that you and your courting partner should encourage and share. Love, fancy, fantasy, delight, dalliance, gestures of lovely liking, which is just such a great phrase. I love that. Gestures of lovely liking. However, you should make sure that these sentiments do not overpower your mind and your practical considerations. Both of you should have the skills, resources, and finances to create a home of your own. People in the period did not tend to live in households of extended family members. The Tudor world tended to be quite nuclear. So you're going to need to pay rent or to buy a property with your own resources, have the stuff to kit it out, have the money for a servant or an apprentice. There's a lot of stuff you got to do before you can even think about getting married. Young people had a lengthy period of adolescence and independence with a high degree of personal mobility and little supervision from direct family. For the overwhelming majority in the common sorts, many left home in late childhood or early teens to find work or to be put in the home of a relative to sort of polish off their skills, make connections, sort of do all the sort of like wheeler dealering that you had to do to get by in the Tudor world. So urban centres, especially cities like London or Norwich, had a relatively high population of single, sexually mature young people looking for love and to start their own lives. Wealthier children were often sent to households of other family members, close neighbours, or people you wanted to ally with. All this sort of stuff so that they're put in the environment to meet the right kind of person. With the average age of marriage for men and women coming in their late 20s, most people didn't get married super young because, like I said, you need that money to start your own home. But you're looking at a potential time frame of 10 to 15 years to explore your dating options. For men of the period, in their own words, they often had little need to initiate courtship on their own. With a higher proportion of men to women in urban centres over the period, men such as Simon Foreman could boast that he was offered a wife many times between Easter and Whitsuntide, and had the sight and choice of 4 or 5 maids and widows. In towns and villages alike, there were plenty of opportunities for single people to meet, mingle, and get involved without supervision. Parish games and regional fairs provided great opportunities to meet eligible singletons. They're respectable places where you could meet with people you already knew or be introduced to people who'd travelled into the area to attend. A fair was a time where social and sexual standards were lowered, behaviour less restrained, gossip less likely to spread, and alcohol readily available. They were locations to buy fairings, cheap tokens of love that could be a great way to introduce yourself to someone new, or let that special someone know you've been thinking of them. Church court records show a great variety of events that might cause love to spring and sparks to fly, from a Sabbath afternoon in 1596 that saw the youth playing at stool ball in the churchyard, a Sunday afternoon in 1624 that saw diverse youth of the parish playing at leapfrog, or an eventide prayer in 1633 that saw young men and women coming together for a dance in a cornfield, just sort of a spontaneous dance, which sounds pretty fun, just sort of like fun little dance time. A tavern or a tippling house gave young people a refuge from the cramped scrutiny of home or their employment or the place that they were staying. Although, taverns associated with illicit sexual liaisons and scandalous matches. Youth culture was often nocturnal. While respectable adults stayed at home, younger people would venture out to avoid parental oversight and control. Young women might host parties or gathering in their rooms, giving them a valuable time for courtship in their shared spaces. Others met their partners at work, in service, with large numbers of people getting their start in life as a servant. So, that working away from home gave you plenty of opportunities to meet and be alone with potential romantic partners, whether they were another servant, the child of your employer, or your employer. They're also an option. And then, just as now, there were random meetings. Church records show plenty of cases where courtship began when people met in the street, a field, a workshop, a barn, or at a stile crossing a field. The majority of courting couples met at work, market, church, or through introductions made by their families. The freedom to meet people and conduct courtship differed depending on your place in the social hierarchy. A young person of wealth and aristocratic position would have less independent chances for courtship than their equivalent in the lower, more common sorts who are not constrained by property, social rank, or familial honour. The richer you were, the more likely it was that your parents would propose a formal match on your behalf, and you'd skip most of the courtship process itself. Poorer young men, and especially women, were more independent in their courting because courtship offered them a chance to determine their future life. No matter how good looking that young man is, does he offer you a practical option for your life? Playing leapfrog outside the church is all very well and good, but you need to find out what money he brings for a potential marriage. You've hosted a little nighttime get-together with your girlfriends and you've met a great guy. You've sussed him out. He's got a good inheritance, he's got a good job, he's a good prospect for a marriage. What's the next step to getting yourself properly courted? Courtship was a highly structured act with a framework of expectations. You just can't, You can't slip a D and that's it. No, there's an expectation, there's like a procedure you have to do. Most couples worked through a set series of behaviours that took them from wooing to courting to getting married. So a maid, not me, a maid has to be courted and won. The man's responsibility was to make visits, offer gifts, and to bring the agreement together. His intended could either withhold their affection or signal their inclination. It was an extended back and forth that involved go-betweens, private moments, so like a dance, a meal, an event where the couple can sort of get to know each other while people are watching them, and gift giving. In this game, a woman's role was passive, but that doesn't mean that she had no agency over what was going on. Gifts were a crucial part of the courtship process. They signalled the strengthening of the relationship and demonstrate progress towards marriage. So this gift, the gifts you're going to be giving her. So these gifts could be coins, rings, ribbons, gloves, girdles, money, clothing, animals, foodstuffs, household furniture, knives, or any kind of knick-knack that worked as a token of goodwill. The Bachelor's Banquet, a cynical pamphlet from 1603, advises young women to play the gift game to entice their suitors into marriage. Look that you give him good entertainment and show him good countenance. If he offers a ring or girdle or any such thing, at the first refuse it, yet kindly and with thanks. But if he urge it on you twice or thrice...
If I want you to bunt, I will touch my belt buckle not once, not twice, but thrice. If I tell this here,
I don't understand a word he's saying.
Take it, telling him, sith that he will needs bestow it on you, you will wear it for his sake. In no time, the fool will be trapped and contracted. Courtship gifts are mentioned frequently in church records, normally as evidence in a dispute as to whether a couple had been intending to marry, if there's a pre-contracted match, if something hinky is going on, especially if there had been pre-marriage canoodling. William Wright, a party to an Oxfordshire matrimonial suit in 1583, protested that he never promised marriage to Margaret Townsend, neither did he ever give her any tokens of goodwill to any such intent to marry her, but saith that he hath given her, as he thinketh, a pair of gloves for a fairing or some such trifle. Samuel Flint, another Oxfordshire man, in 1584 acknowledged giving Anne Blanche of Hook Norton a girdle and a pair of gloves in token of goodwill, but not upon any promise of marriage. He denied making any contract or carnal copulation. I think he probably did. Gifts were complex signifiers of promise and obligation, especially with items such as gloves, which could be worn openly to display, your courtship is secure, that you have this connection with this person. In the case of William Dithers and Elizabeth Williams, every gift was recorded, so he noted them down, and showed how much money and effort went into them. He recorded giving her, and I'm just going to have to read it out, because he gave her a lot of stuff, 5 pairs of gloves worth 12 shillings, one to be given as a gift to his sister on their wedding day, 2 purses worth 4 shillings, a girdle worth 3 shillings, a pair of knives worth 3 shillings and 10 pence, a candlestick, a chamber pot belonging to William Dithers and left to be used after marriage, a petticoat worth 13 shillings, a silver thimble worth 2 shillings and 6pence, a scaff worth 13 shillings, a piece of silver work worth 12 pence, a dozen and a half silk points to be given away on their wedding day, presents to her mother, 2 pairs of gloves, 2.5 loads of wood, a pair of slippers, 3 pounds of starch, a dozen temple candles, 2 temple pots, temple wine pot, satin and silk lace that her mother put aside for their children. Well, it seems like he was very serious there, and I don't think she was as serious about him as he wanted her to be. These gifts could be coercive as well as affectionate. a woman might be pressured by a man or her family into accepting gifts that were seen as cementing this marriage prospect. A man might force gifts and tokens on a woman who wanted to refuse them, often in quite sexual ways, such as like right down her cleavage, or in her pockets. And bearing in mind that your pockets would be under your skirt, so he's literally just shoving his hand right under your skirt to put something in your pocket, which is very invasive. So we can take the case of Anne Sustin. So Anne Sustin refused Robert Lawnsfield. She was like, I don't want to marry you anymore. And he said to her, if you cannot so do, let me have such things as you have of mine, and God speed you well. So he's cool. He's cool with it. She goes back into the house to fetch the handkerchief that he had given her, and her mother intervenes and is like, excuse me, she counselled Anne to keep him, for he was an honest man, and saying, thou mayest well have a richer, but never a more gentler fellow. And then her mum goes to get her dad to intervene, saying that Anne could find it in her heart to keep Robert and his handkerchief for longer. Anne's dad, who kind of sounds a bit more sus to what Anne actually wanted, advised that marriage is not for a day or two, but it's forever. So, Anne's got to do what's best for Anne. Robert Lawnsfield, who's still there, added if she could keep touch, she should have a better gift. Taking a piece of gold of 10 shillings from his purse, he took Anne about the neck and kissed her, saying he gave her that piece of gold in the way of marriage, which she gently received without any answer. The public act of being a gift is a socially and psychologically binding custom. By taking that gift, Anne accepted what was being offered to her. Further gifts, especially rings, would be exchanged when the couple formally agreed to marry. So you go through all that process, giving all those presents, and then finally at the end of it she's like, yeah, we'll get married. Rosa Clark of Burton, Leicestershire, was given a betrothal ring in 1590 and exclaimed, it was as fit for her as if it were made for her finger, or if her finger had been in the place where it was made. You need to counter the story about Anne, because that's a little bit sad, Rosa and her engagement ring, which she sounds extremely excited to get, which is really nice. And while male suitors were socially expected to give gifts, popularised in ballads, folk songs, poems and art, women were likely to give them in return. Personalised gifts suggested intimacy between a couple. The furniture implied your shared future home, and clothing had an association with adult sexuality. Gifts and tokens were a line of progression from early courtship to pre-betrothal communications to a formal betrothal. And it's no wonder they get brought up in marriage disputes a lot. If you read any church records of the period, there's so many. What you thought was just a throwaway token might be taken by someone else as your clear intent to marry them, and could land you in court if you seriously pissed off a family invested in this relationship. Just about every decision made in the 16th century comes back around to hierarchy. Society had a strict hierarchy of rank, and the social status of your marital partner determined the place you took in society and the potential mobility you could expect to have. There were many constraints that could be expected to play a role in a potential courtship. The economics of your match, the distance, sort of physical distance between the two of you, available places to meet up, legal frameworks, your individual emotions, and the pressure you might expect to face from your family, friends, and peers. Parents were facilitators and prompters of courtship, so they'll help you to make a match or bring it all to a flaming end. Not only were they often the originators of potential match, throwing you in the pathway of other eligible singletons or making formal offers on your behalf with other families, but with each potential match you made, they would screen them. Does the woman offer a good enough dowry? Does the man have a good enough estate? What's their family background? Are they a suitable age for you?
The guy who bullied you at school, he was horrible, wasn't he?
Yeah, is that your question?
No, it's, yeah, that's what it is.
Because despite popular perceptions, people in the 16th century were incredibly against huge age gap relationships and did not want their young daughters marrying old men. They didn't like that at all. They thought it was weird and creepy. The 1571 case of Thomas Soley and Agnes Smith shows how influential family could be on your dating. The match had been made through the agency of her mother and her mother's kinsman, so they got Thomas and Agnes together. With permission, Thomas and Agnes met and talked together of matrimony to be had betwixt them two. Agreeing that he would make a good son-in-law, Agnes's mother invited Thomas to come round to the house again, and in the meantime she told him she would talk with her friends and give the said Thomas an answer. Thomas and Agnes negotiated their courtship. Both their families negotiate how the match and the wedding is going to come about. Thomas and Agnes were left alone on Midsummer Day while everyone else went to the fair. The couple, on their alone time, then agreed to be married, hand-fasted, and he kissed her and put a ring on her finger. It's in my hand there, on my finger. So far, so normal. Only Agnes was already pre-contracted to another suitor 3 years earlier. William Headley had already been betrothed to Agnes Smith. She wasn't free to marry Thomas. The matter was taken to court, and witnesses came forward to testify they had facilitated Agnes's previous courtship. John Simpson, kin of William Headley, testified that about harvest time, this 2 years ago, carried a bowed goat and a bowed twopence as tokens from William to Agnes, so that's John carrying them for him. His brother, Edward, witnessed the two hand-fasting. He thought in his conscience that they two were man and wife before God and could have no other. While most young people might be left alone to start the process of courtship, family had to be involved when it started getting into the talk of marriage. Two people marrying would restructure two different kin groups, blending families together and importing new people into a community. Property would be exchanged. Questions of money and inheritance changed. Business ventures mixed and new connections made. It required the goodwill of everyone who might be potentially impacted or brought into contact with the new married couple. Parents, friends, godparents, cousins, in-laws, neighbours, your master or mistress, or anyone in the community affiliated with you or felt that they had a need to protect you. One Constance Austin was denied permission to court and marry James Hafferden because her uncles refused to give their goodwill for her match. Marion Rogers was charged by her parents not to come in the company of William Austin nor to talk with him. She did anyway and made a promise with him. I shall lease my friend's goodwill in so doing, but yet, notwithstanding, I will marry for myself and not for my friends, for I know that they care not if I were dead, so that they might have my goods, for they have kept me in, saying I am mad, so long, and would not let me go abroad to speak with him that I love, so that it almost cost me my life. A bad marriage match could disturb the local social order, and carried heavy questions of reputation, honour and morality. The Tudors lived in a communal world, much more communal than ours, where everyone was expected to contribute and follow social rules. A poor choice of spouse could lead to you being collectively shamed by your community or parish for the rest of your life, and ignoring the wishes of your parents was seen as hugely shameful. The opinions and decisions of your family group, friends and kin had a hugely influential role on whether a young person carried on with a courtship. Disapproving families might intervene to put physical restrictions in place to prevent unwanted courtships, such as sending their son and daughter to another parish or to faraway relatives to prevent them from meeting a lover. In a patriarchal society, most would capitulate when their parents put their foot down on an issue. Although, as ever, things are never as simple as they might seem, there are plenty of recorded cases of couples running away and eloping together, even though that saw them effectively giving up their familial bonds and their support networks. However, in a world of facilitated matches or engineered meetings of the right person, it was considered a great moral evil for parents to force matches. Overly arranged marriages were widely denounced by moralists, guidance books, and by the opinion writers of the day. The ideal for courtship was not complete parental dictation of choice, but to work towards a position of multilateral consent within your kinship framework. There's a good phrase for you. At the end of the day, a marriage brought about without consent of the married couple was an illegal match. It couldn't legally happen and could be dissolved under law. And once you'd gotten to the legal age of majority at the age of 21, there's nothing to stop you from just running away and getting married to the person you chose. Parents probably wouldn't speak to you again, but you'd at least have that really hot guy, I suppose. Hopefully he makes it worth it. Probably not really. There's a tendency of many historians, and I'll hold my hands up for falling into this very trap, to attribute motivations for couples and peoples of the past that fall in line with your own wider theories or worldview of the period. It's easy to fall into an assumption that people had no love or care for each other, that all marriages were strictly arranged and had no room for natural love and affection to grow, and that all men were predatory and all women were passive agents. And there's plenty of older works that espouse those very views. It's also easy to fall into the opposite assumption that people had complete control and were devoid of any social or economic pressures that dictated their marital choice. Dating and falling in love were complex, multi-layered undertakings. Back then, as they are now, only people had what is perhaps a more flexible system of love that balanced their desire for love and physical affection with a practical need. You gotta make sure you still got food in your belly and clothes on your back at the end of the day. Love is not going to provide those for you. People of the Tudor period saw themselves as stems of a wider society, a commonwealth, with a function to support, serve, and nurture others. Courtship was part of that tree of commonwealth and how it prospered. Courtship was a negotiation of status, relationship, privilege, and prospect. It was about learning the character and resources of a prospective partner, assessing the new network of kin you would gain, and establishing the obligations and rank you would have for the rest of your life. Love, choice, and individual experiences existed, but had practical boundaries. Elizabeth Fletcher of Canterbury said, when contemplating her marriage, "I must be ruled by my friends, as well as myself." The social identity you created for yourself would be guided by those who had authority, influence, and guidance over you. Every stage was measured by expectations. Every step, society and your family worked to remind you that your marriage was forever. Marriage was permanent. It's crucial you made the right choice the first time around. As strict or as restrictive that courtship might seem, it was that way for a reason. The last thing families wanted was for their son or daughter to be caught in a marriage they couldn't escape. Courtship reached its climax when a couple agreed to marry. How they expressed it, how formal it might be, whether they decided to have sex before the marriage, or if the ceremony would even be legally binding, were all big, messy areas of debate. And those are all questions for next time. Come back next month to discuss all things marital. Once you've put that ring on it, what's the next step before walking down the aisle? Thanks for watching to the end, and if you could give this video a little like, maybe? Boost that algorithm, a share or a subscribe. You know, it all helps to boost the algorithm because YouTube don't like me. Spread the love, man. If you want to support me and the kind of work that I do, videos on aspects of Tudor history, I do some Tudor costuming, I do some Tudor historical cooking, I do hot media takes sometimes. Click on the Ko-fi link down below to give me a one-time donation, or check through my Amazon wishlist for further research materials for future works. If you don't want to use the corporate killers and planet polluters at Amazon, but you know a great book or a research paper or something that you have access to and you want to share, put it in the comments below or send me a message and we'll work something out. I can only continue doing this sort of stuff if people are interested, because I've so many things to do. So little time, but so many things that I want to do. Onwards and forwards with our look at Tudor love for the year. And I did a cute little eyeshadow look. For once I did nice makeup, because I don't normally, because I don't like doing it. But thank you for watching. I'll see you next month or sooner.